So today we are joined by Scott Brits, Scott Britton. I know there's a story behind that, which we'll get into shortly, but welcome to the podcast, Scott.
Thank you so much for having me, Phil. Really excited to be here and to chat to you for a bit.
Splendid. Fellow Northerner.
Yes. I'm in the South, so I act like the king of the North in the South. But yeah, the North is never.
Well, I'm in the South, so who's the king of the North? I won't put that on you. I won't put that on you. I won't put that on you. It's all good. It's all good. But we're happy wherever we are.
You could be the Southeast, I'll be the Southwest.
I completely lost my train of thought there for a moment. I just didn't know what to say. All good. But Scott, obviously we've got a lot to get through. I know little bits about you, but again, we want to kind of dig into your mindset. We want to dig into, what's brought you to where you are now. I know you've got an interesting story and you're doing a lot of diverse and different things right now. Let's start with the name. That's an interesting one that I didn't know until we were talking prior to the podcast. So Scott Brits is your social media handle as such, which
yes.
I think is really kind of patriotic in many respects. It's that Brit thing. It's so tell me about how that came about.
Yeah. So my name's Scott Britton. So it's I was actually born in Manchester, but spent a lot of time in Scotland as well. So very strange family setup that I have. However, the family, when I was a lot younger, I was always growing up between Glasgow and Manchester. So I had a massive hybrid of Glaswegian accent and a Manchester one. So I was always told that my name originated from Brittany in France. So great-great-great-grandfather came from Brittany, came over to Scotland, long story short. But I worked for 9 years until kind of what I'm currently doing now in the police. But I worked in serious crime. So I was actually very quickly out of being a uniformed police officer. Within about a year of being in the police, I was kind of straight out of that world and into very serious and organized crime. And at the time, I laugh about it and I always do it with a smile. I had multiple death threats. I was really good at annoying the wrong people. So I would take a lot of money off people that didn't like to have money taken off them legally. Let me just kind of...
Yeah, I was going to say legitimately.
That on there. Yeah. Very legitimately.
Visions of the Sweeney there.
Yeah, if you saw how small my house is, you'd think I've buried it somewhere else. But you would find very quickly when you were taking, so there's a thing called POCA, which is Police and Criminal Evidence Act, where you can take money off people. You find when you're taking £1-2 million off certain people, they don't like that, and then they come back for you. So several times, both myself and my wife now, but girlfriend and fiance at the time, we had death threats. We had people attempt to break into where we lived. You'd have...
and this was in Manchester, yeah?
Yeah, so this is in Manchester. You'd have your boss ring you and say, we've had a credible threat on your life, and you have to do lots of things. But at the same time, I was massively passionate about building the foundations of using fitness as a fundraising vehicle. So social media was a big tool for that. And being the gobby person that I am, I needed to kind of have that. But at the same time, I couldn't really let high-level professional criminals have an insight in terms of my other aspects of my life. So it was always like Scott Brits, which was pretty simple. And I'm sure if they were a bit cleverer, they probably could have pieced two and two together. But I never had any issues from social media. It was always from work. So yeah, really long-winded way of kind of explaining it, but it just stuck. And I was like, well, kind of what's the point? I really like it.
Okay, so you left the forces.
So at the moment, so I'm on a career break. So
okay.
So the police have been fantastic. They've given me a 5-year career break. So it means that the reason that that's happened is that I can be called back. So I don't get paid. So I'm not paid from the police. Pension stops, everything else. But it's if there's a major incident, if something else came back in, I'd get called back. So for example,
skills will be required.
Yeah, so I was like one of the national trained leads on modern day slavery. I was surveillance trained. They'd put quite a bit of money into using me. So for them, it was like if something was to go on and they really needed me, they'd drag me back. But COVID hasn't resulted in that because crime hasn't risen as a result of COVID. So they've not needed me so far. So touch wood, I've still got about another 4 years left. So I left the police last November, which was fantastic timing considering the what was on the horizon.
Okay, cool. So tell me a little bit about your history. So was there a reason why you went into the police force? Because again, I think certainly when you look at serious crime, when you look at, you know, the various echelons that you can move through in the police force, I think it takes certain characters, you know, a bit like the military, it takes certain characters to move into certain forces and blah, blah, blah. So what was the police thing? Was it, you know, were your parents in the police? Was it something that you just always wanted to be? How did you end up joining the police?
Yeah, it was like a weird one, really. So, I mean, I have a really weird, like I say, so weird, probably, hopefully, people that listen to this. So, I got booted out of my house when I was like just turning about 17. So, I actually lived technically homeless for about a year, various stages of trying to find places to live. And then I managed to get myself through college, got myself into university. Quite luckily, although I had a very troubled kind of home life, I was lucky with having fantastic people around me that, again, pulling into fitness, and why I've always been a big advocate of that. I was Thai boxing, I was fighting in MMA, and I was doing the early kind of onset stages of weight training and physical training. So as a result of that, I grew up in a really like lower economic parts of Manchester. So
Okay.
there's a tendency to call them rough, and there's a tendency to call them bad places, and they're not, because the vast majority of people are there because of a result of, you know, just lack of education, lack of job opportunities, whatever else. Not everybody in those areas is bad, but I grew up in an area where you would see the police a lot, and you would see things happen as you walk down the street. You would see things happen to the houses next to you, etc. So it was always a thing to me of like, okay, I want to work where my actions and on a day-to-day basis can have an impact on people's lives. And instead of kind of going into, you know, fantastic careers that are out there, that was just something to me that was I saw that had a direct impact, and it meant something to me. So as I went through university, applied for the police as I kind of came out. This was way back when Labour transitioned through to Tories. The Tories put a hold on it. This was like the last kind of recession and trying to come out of it. And then 2 years later, I finally got in. So it was just as a result of kind of living on the streets a bit, seeing how, you know, the other side of the world lives from where I grew up, and family that I kind of know a little bit about from Glasgow were unfortunately on the other end of the law, and seeing what happens to people when they're on the other end of the law. So it was always something for me to kind of get into, but it was really based on having, what can I do on a day-to-day impact in my working life that will have a wider impact on other people, as opposed to just financially, because trust me, nobody joins the cops for financial gain.
So you say about this kind of diverse, you know, you said the Glasgow was one end of the spectrum, and I'm assuming Manchester the other end of the spectrum, right? Where you've got kind of law-abiding versus non-law abiding citizens, I guess. And you had that in two aspects of your family. Yeah, is that what I'm?
Well, to be really kind of like honest, I'd say both of them were just as bad. And we grew up in Port Glasgow, so Greenock, which is ex-shipping town. You know, the docks was where everybody made like a living, and then that massively went down. Drug use went up, organised criminal activity went up, and then in Manchester, I grew up in Salford. Again, similar council estate where I grew up. Lots of that kind of happening. So I was always kind of on that other end. Parents were not fantastic, so I was always kind of aware that, you know, I'm seeing the lower end of what goes on here, and I'm seeing you grow up getting used to crime. And, you know, my wife is from Devon. This is why we live in Devon. And, you know, I remember going into pubs when I was like 15 and going into like nightclubs when I was 15 and 16. Probably, yeah. At least down here, they don't get it. But then seeing people getting their head, you know, bashed off things, you know, seeing people fighting, seeing people bottled, seeing people beaten up in streets. And, you know, if a neighbor went out to complain to a gang of kids because there was noise, whatever, they'd get beaten up. And seeing that and knowing that that was not acceptable, and knowing that I could go into something that would be the person that would turn up and deal with that and stop it and kind of have a wider impact. So I think that was I always had a drive to do something that would impact on other people in a positive way, because I'd seen people impact on people in a negative way. And you can go two ways, can't you? You can either go into what you've seen, or you can go in the opposite direction. So I think for me, I was brought up being taught the wrong lessons, which in a good way taught me the right lessons, if that makes sense.
Okay. So you never went down that path. You never.
Not for myself, no. I mean, you know, Jesus, where I grew up, like, you wouldn't always be able to talk yourself out of certain situations. And hence the reason I did, you know, 16 years worth of Thai boxing, MMA. you needed to be able to look after yourself. But in terms of doing things against the law, I was always really aware that the people around me, lads that I went to school with, are in prison for, you know, attempted manslaughter. There's people that I knew and played rugby with and played football with that were dealing drugs on a major level when I was 14. You know, that was the thing that I grew up with. So I was always given the wrong lessons, but my way of dealing with that was like, that's wrong. I need to do the opposite of that. Like, I want to be part of the chain of the opposition of what I see.
So this is really interesting, because ultimately you're telling me all the things that would point you in the direction that you haven't gone. You know, you're saying, look, I was surrounded by all of this stuff. It was part of my life. It was part of where I was, you know, where I was brought up, and I was surrounded by it. And ultimately, in amongst that, I would imagine most of your peers, right, were probably encouraging you to get involved with that sort of thing. And obviously then there's the other side of it, is that, you know, if you're growing up in, you know, not necessarily poverty, but lower income, you know, this is where things like drug dealing and what have you, you know, will have a monetary appeal, as well as, you know, probably a status appeal, right? Certainly in those kind of areas. So what intrigues me is to how you've carved your own mindset out of this. I mean, I can get it in, and I mean, what kind of years are we talking here? Where, you know, where were we at here? 19?
Well, so I was born 1987. So you probably, when did I start high school? Like 2000 and
so early 2000s,
2001.
Right?
Yeah, really 2000.
So early 2000s, you know, internet was about, so there was things there that you could maybe focus on or look at, and change your mindset and the way that you looked at things. But to me, that's really fascinating, because I grew up in a small town, and there was this kind of inbuilt mentality as to, this is what you did. You know, you do this, you get a job here or here or here or here, and there was like just various places that everybody would work, or you'd take over from what your parents did. So you'd inherit a business. You know, it could be a farm, could be a pub, or whatever it might be, and then you continue to do that. You get married, you have a couple of kids, and that's you. And that was kind of how it was. So it was a bit bizarre to see someone step away from that. But I grew up in an area where crime was, you know, we used to absolutely kick ourselves if the policeman drove past us. You know, we had a local, you know, I grew up in a village where, you know, police, there used to be local police, right? They used to have a police house in villages, and this is showing my age, right? This is probably before your time, right? And it used to have like a local, we used to call it the local bobby, right? But the local bobby would come in the pub, you know? You know, my mum and dad owned a pub, so he'd come in the pub, and everybody would stop for a second, and then he'd order a drink, and then everybody carry on. And they'd be like, you know, we need to ascertain whether he's on duty or he isn't. And in effect, he was on duty all the time, because that was his job. He was a full-time policeman for that village. So it was interesting. But as kids, you know, we didn't step on the wrong side of the law, because firstly, we didn't see it. We weren't privy to it. We didn't see people breaking the law. We didn't see any benefit to doing it, apart from, you know, the only thing that we would get is a huge telling off from our parents, and, you know, we'd get grounded for however long. And getting grounded in a village is pretty grim, right? You know, so it just intrigues me as to how, and I'm sure we could get into it would be a massive conversation, like a huge conversation, I think, to actually get to the bottom of where that all stemmed from. But do you have it now that you're a bit older and you've experienced things, and you kind of look back? Is there something where you can pinpoint why you didn't go down that route, and why you didn't opt for, I guess, what at the time would have probably been the easier way out? Because obviously everybody around you would then go, oh, well, Scott's part of the gang, or Scott's part of the, you know, the culture, Scott's part of all of this. And instead you actually rebelled against it. And judging by what you told me, and again, I don't want to dig into this if you don't want to, but, you know, your family life wasn't perfect, right? And that again would tend to push people the wrong way, not the right way. So it intrigues me as to where this mindset of yours came from, where you've all of a sudden decided that I'm going to do the right thing, even though I might not be terribly clear on what the right thing is. You know what I mean?
Do you know what? Yeah, 100%. And I think there's a couple of things that pull into it. And I think even in terms of like the past, probably 18 months, we've been through so much different things in terms of what we're trying to do about cancer, and transitioning from not being, you know, Mr. Policeman to kind of thinking about the way that you approach stuff. And I think it was a couple of different things. I think so one, I'm definitely borderline on that spectrum of autism in terms of the way that I'm very black and white, and I see things and I can make decisions. And in fact, the more stressful a decision and the more potentially violent and volatile a situation is, the more calm and more clear I kind of get. So that, I think, is something that's been born with. I genuinely think I react in certain ways differently. I think that's then been fueled. I think there's been a fuel of my early experience of what went on at home, what didn't go on at home, and then what went on around me. I think that again cleared a lot of decision making. I think I had a very early understanding of what I felt was right and wrong from people that were around me that were not in those aspects. And that came from sport, and it really did. And it's something that I am very, very passionate about, and why I talk about sport and fitness, because Thai boxing from a very early age was an initial thing for me of like, I don't want to get my head kicked in when I walk down a certain road.
Yeah.
But I'm not going out to seek violence, but I need to be able to look after myself. So I remember really vivid incident, walking down this road, this lad pulls a knife out on me, so stabs me in the leg, and then, but I mean, I say stabbed me in the leg, it was a tiny little thing that he had, but I absolutely leathered him. And from that period, there was a certain aspect of, even in my own mind, okay, if someone's doing something to me, I can look after myself now. So the decision points in this situation, I don't have to run away. I remembered as a kid constantly running away from people, running away from areas, running away from my house, running away from people. If there was a gang at the end of the street, I'd run past them, or I'd run different ways.
But is that not sometimes a good thing?
Yeah, in terms of treating violence with violence, you would never say that, but it was always just a thing of running away. There was never a plan, there was never a structure, there was never, okay, like what's the route around this.
So did you feel like almost your space had been invaded, where you were like, look, I don't want to fight with somebody, but I also don't want to give up my ground, in that I'm perfectly within my right to be walking here, right?
Not even that. Like, I think I'm probably not explaining it well enough. Like, because that comes down to this, like, oh, I'm such a man, and this is mine, and that's mine. And I really don't believe in that. I think it was more in terms of a sense of not having a control. So, the fight or flight reaction it comes down to control, and we can control. The fight reaction doesn't always mean fighting. It just might mean a controlled response to what's going on. And I think the flight aspect is a lack of control, and that was what I was always existing in. If I got a beating at home, it was a flight resistance, just run away and deal with something. If it was something that happened in the streets, it was a flight reaction to kind of deal with it. And what I had to really learn was lessons about, okay, how do I control my mind? How do I control what happens here? And then how do I then take that to have an impact in a good way? So all those little things became like decisions in my mind. So decisions to be, to go training. I took myself to Thai boxing classes and lessons, and managed to do that to myself. I chose to do as much as I could in terms of education, and I saw people around me that were getting arrested by the police walking into school because they were major drug dealers at the age of like 13 and 14. And I realized, okay, I've not got rich parents. I don't have an extended network. I live where I live. How do I get out of this circle? Because if I don't, this is just going to happen. And I didn't have the wisdom to see it so much like that. I was just like, this is not something I want to be in, and how do I get out of it? And I think that was where I identified sport, learning to control yourself, learning to control what you do, but then also education as well. Because if I can get myself some form of an education, I can get myself earning more money. I can get myself out of this particular thing. So it was a combination of those things. But like I said at the beginning, there was people in sport that, rugby coach, I remember Mr. Clare, very, very clear lessons in terms of, I would see how he would treat the lads in the rugby team. So, I won't mention names, but there was lads in our rugby team that were phenomenal athletes, but they were drug dealers. They were being paid to beat people up because they were massive lads. They were hard as nails, and they were very talented athletes at the same time. They'd get dropped. We would lose matches because they've done something. So I was getting taught lessons by people around me that were really good. And in terms of martial arts, for young people, it's a phenomenal lesson about self-control, about respect, about choosing a path that isn't involving violence and least resistance. And then I met a phenomenal guy called Paul George, who, very seminal for me. He was a bodybuilder, really, really big bodybuilder in the UK, did really, really well in the US. He let me in the gym. I used to hoover the gym.
From Manchester?
So in Manchester. All right. Well,
Yeah.
see, very small world. So Paul and his wife at the time, Lahani, different wife now, Tanya, who's again phenomenal.
Yeah, awesome.
But Paul said to me, I lived with Paul as a teenager. He let me stay in the house during these periods of
Incredible
homelessness.
bodybuilder in his time.
Yeah, I mean, and the
Right.
knowledge that man has is I've stole probably what he's forgotten. He knows that much, and he let me hoover the gym. I hoovered the gym and I trained in there, and I learned lessons from Paul about, Paul's a phenomenal bodybuilder, but he's quite a small guy. He's not particularly big. I would never mess with him, but he's not a giant of a man in terms of physical stature. And he would turn away big time drug dealers who would try and come and use the gym. He'd kick someone out for, chewing gum in the gym, regardless of then they'd say, oh, I'm going to come back and burn your gym and blah, 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 and all this. And so he was someone that taught me a lot of lessons in terms of, having a set of values and believing in them, and having values that would impact and help other people, because I'm not the only person that man helped. There was countless other young men that lived in Manchester and Salford that came to that gym and dealt with Paul, who learned lessons about how to get out of that. And it was Paul that, the very first thing we did pre it being called Battle Cancer was at Olympic Gym. It was at Paul's gym. And, it was people like that I always say I was incredibly lucky to be around, that helped me formulate the way that my mind is now, hopefully getting towards today. You don't get out of those situations by just having some Rain Man level of, sorting yourself out. It's people around you. When you go and say this happened at home, they go, that's not right. Like, that's not acceptable. This happened at school. You shouldn't act like that. You shouldn't do this. It's those people around you that you can collectively take from to formulate yourself. And I think there's often, as humans, we search for those things to be excuses for poor behavior, or we develop our own prejudices or chips in our shoulder.
Yep.
So, it's somebody I had a really great chat with someone about this a couple of months ago about, I did for a period of time believe that anyone who came from a moneyed background, or if you lived in London, I'm better than you because I've had it tough. I've had it tough to be where I am. And that's rubbish. Like, that's such a closed mentality. And that was my prejudice and my own problem. But you have to have people around you to kind of mold that way. So it was those people that taught me, you can have an impact on people's lives by your effort and your energy, instead of using what you've been through as an excuse for poor behavior. And I think that's the really lucky reason of where I'm at now, I think.
Yeah, I think looks a very a broad term, I think, to put around that. I think there's a lot of decisions along the way that somebody has to make from a moral and ethical standpoint, and it sounds like you've made a lot of good decisions, and obviously led by the right people or have listened to the right people. And again, how you navigate that is very tricky. I mean, we talk about echo chambers, and the problem is that if you grew up in this echo chamber of this is what life is, and there's various prejudice and blah blah blah, and we can look at any kind of prejudice that exists, right? It's all to do with echo chambers. It's all to do with the people you surround yourself with and what you learn and blah, blah, blah. And it really intrigues me. And like I say, there's little elements that I know Paul, I know Tani, and Olympic Gym, and I know what they're about. And some of that actually really makes sense now to me, but because I know them and I know what they're about, and I know how they are and all those different things. So fast forward a little bit, I think, and I think there's loads of stuff in there that we could probably delve back into, the Thai boxing and the rugby. You played rugby, yeah?
Yeah.
So you did Thai boxing, you did rugby, you did a bit of MMA, you did all those different things.
Anything that I could class as a sport, I tried. So, I mean, I was literally, as a teenager, I was doing 100 meter, 200 meter, beyond 200 meter, I was terrible. Did shot put, rugby, football. I was always better at rugby than I was at football. I think I always had a failed, vain thought that I was good at football, but I wasn't. I was much.
That's an northern thing as well. Especially in Manchester. I think in Manchester,
we're all like the next Ryan.
Yeah, it's like everybody's going to be a footballer. Especially back then, it was, I would imagine there weren't many schools probably even did rugby, was there? Did you do rugby at school?
It was all rugby league as well. So if you said rugby union, we were like,
Salford. So you'd be,
So we were all like, we'd have Salford Reds come and do stuff. Sale was starting to grow a bit bigger as well. So you would see, Jason Robinson was at Sale at the time. You would start to see a little bit of union, but union was like a soft boy sport, like it was league. And we would sometimes do league, like a half and a half. So us as a school, we'd go and do like a half league and a half union match against like private boys' schools and absolutely decimate them. So we always had this kind of thing about rugby league. But then at some point, everyone turned into a monster, and I stayed at like 5'10". I was like, yes, this is not going to be a profession for me. But yeah, Thai boxing from a really early age, and then MMA for about 4 and a bit years. And I say MMA with a really big like this because it was more the jiu-jitsu. I was just really interested in terms of the Brazilian jiu-jitsu, the non-gi stuff. And then it was a culmination of those things that then went into powerlifting. So if it was
it Paul and Tani that introduced you to powerlifting?
Yeah. So I went back into, after kind of a break of a good few years of just like gym training. I was always just like chest day, back day, all this kind of stuff went in, and I was always told I was very strong. So I was told I was strong for my size, which was why I did really well in rugby. It was why I did really well in terms of some jiu-jitsu and striking and stuff.
And that makes sense with the 100 and 200 meter thing, where anything above 200 meters, you won't be good.
I was the king of fast twitch
physiology,
fibers.
fast twitch fibers everywhere.
That was it. I'm just one fast twitch fiber, nothing else. And then powerlifting was something from coming back to Paul and Tanya, and they were just really breaking the mold in the UK of going competing in the world. I think like Tanya was the first woman to eat, like, I think she totaled 500 kilo. He was the first woman to do that, and it was super exciting to start learning a really disciplined like sport and open up a lot more. So it came through those guys, and then that was probably, in terms of like career wise and success as an athlete, powerlifting was probably one of my most successful periods until moving into kind of CrossFit stuff.
Yeah, I think I'd have been playing rugby similar time to you. I think I was over in Wigan. I was in Oral.
Ah, right, okay.
We shared our training ground now and again with Wigan Warriors.
Nice, cool.
So, which at the time I don't even think they were called Warriors. I think they brought in those sort of secondary names a bit further down the line. You know, Salford was just Salford, and Warrington was just Warrington, and then they brought
Salford Reds always had like the devil, because we always used to go and do these little things outside the town hall where you do like practice runs and pad hitting and all this kind of stuff. And I always remember there was always like the devil there. But I think you're right, it wasn't until like the French team started coming to the Super League that they gave these secondary sort of names and stuff.
Yeah, no, we used to have quite a few rugby league guys used to come over to us and play for the union team, and it was it was interesting. But again, this is this kind of cultural part of the world, right? Is that certain areas it's rugby league, certain areas, you know, growing up in Cumbria, West Cumbria was rugby league, you know, the other side of Cumbria was rugby union, and that's how it was. It was just how it was. And you know, we talk about like kind of this prejudice towards, you know, things, and this was this prejudice towards sport. It was like you were either rugby league or you rugby union. There was no
you can't be both.
Can't be both. But it was mad. So let's get on to, you know, so you've taken this career break. I'm assuming it was planned.
So it took about a year to kind of get to that decision. But
right, and you've developed this love for fitness and well-being, health and fitness, and all these different things. So when you're thinking about moving away from the police and taking this career break, I'm assuming this is kind of given as an option to you. Is it a career break? Because that's a hefty career break, 5 years, right?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not widely publicized. You kind of need to know that you get it, and it's usually only for set things. So it's like for further education, like a social endeavor in terms of what we're trying to grow. You can't just kind of say, "Oh, I'm going to go off and be a plumber for 5 years and I'm going to come back." Yeah. So it has to get approved. It took quite a while to get approved because they wanted to see what you're actually doing. And you know, I think that the kind of concept is that if you do come back at the end of this, during that period, have you bettered yourself? Have you, have you learned more, and have you educated more in terms of just having a break for 5 years? It's not widely publicized, but every police force offers it. So, you know, it is out there for anyone who's thinking about it.
And I'm assuming, you know, what you were doing in the police force was probably, and again, you don't come across the kind of guy that would probably get stressed about these sorts of things, but I would assume there probably is a high stress level involved with what you were doing, right?
Yeah, and it's like a hidden stress. So it's something in terms of that you're not overtly aware of. So as I say, I wasn't ever stressed out work. So I mean, you get a call 20 minutes before you go in saying there's a male that's just been stabbed 68 times. His life proving to be extinct, which means it's not quite dead, but he ain't going to be dead yet, and he ain't coming back alive. And all of a sudden you've got to start coordinating that response. And I never flapped. I wasn't a flapper. And in fact, one of my feedback in my was always Scott's too calm, which always was a bit interesting. But that was a big thing. So I was never overtly, as in like you wouldn't see the stress, but the stress internally, I think, in terms of dealing with certain things every day. And it's one of the reasons that I talk about mental health and fitness, because I estimate 50 to 60 suicides of males that I've dealt with in a 5 or 6 year period of that career. And it builds up on you. It builds up in terms of, I wasn't one of these people, and there is people that suffer this, but I wouldn't go home and I wouldn't, dream of seeing the person that I've dealt with today. I wouldn't be haunted by the vision of them or anything. I would just always see it as huge missed opportunities and sadness and reoccurring themes with people that had lost their lives. And that builds up on you because I'm like, I want to do something about this. Like there's some other stuff that can be done. So that kind of building became the stress. And I'd say the last year prior to the career break, we were running 6 battle cancer events across the UK and Europe, and it was becoming, the job split was becoming, okay, in work I'm actually having a lot of conversations now about battle cancer stuff and about fitness, so it was starting to build to that. But yeah, in terms of stress, I would say, as much as I can sit here and be like, oh, I'm such a cool guy, it was stressful. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, no, it again, fascinating sort of psychology behind all of that, because it's, those are pictures that I would assume that many people find it very difficult to remove from their psyche, right? Is that, very, very hard to go home and to, when you've just witnessed someone die or whatever it might be, and just to get on with life and not necessarily shrug your shoulders at it, but to be able to put it to the back of your mind, which they would always argue that putting it in the back of your mind is a bad thing to do.
Yeah.
but it's that mentality that, I've seen with, I've got friends in the special forces at very high elite levels in special forces, and their mentality seems to be very similar in that they deal with these kind of things. And I think that might be, particularly in the forces, I think might be part of the inclusion process where, maybe you got fast tracked because of that mentality or certain psychological traits that maybe they picked up on you. And again, it's another conversation, but it intrigues me as to how people cope with these things, because coping mechanisms and mental health and all these different things are things that we do readily talk about, and we talk about on the podcast to several people, and how people manage them is fascinating. So battle cancer, tell me about battle cancer. So you've raised over £500,000, maybe more. Is that now?
No. So, I mean, by now, I always have to correct people. I haven't. So the events and the activations.
Okay. So I'm referring to battle cancer.
Yeah. So, but even battle cancer, we haven't. And everyone goes, oh, stop trying to be modest. I'm like, I'm not. It's like, so the people that have done our events have raised just under £1 million in about the past sort of.
Right. So who developed battle cancer?
Well, yeah, so it was myself that came up with the concept, but okay. I do always kind of I really like to outline that, because it's great and I love it, but it's never this fundraising, as the fundraisers I've done and people contribute to me, but as an event series and as an activation, yeah, it just sits just under £1 million, and it's for about 32 different cancer charities that it's supported so far.
Amazing.
In its kind of inception. That's.
Well, I think you should take a great, because at the end of the day, if you hadn't thought of that, it wouldn't exist. So as much as everybody else is, it's a very humbling thing for you to turn around and say, look, it wasn't me, it was everybody else, but everybody else wouldn't be there doing what they're doing without you sort of coming up with that idea. So I think you do need to take a little bit of that, and I think that is very characteristic of what's coming across in your personality. So even though you probably just shrug your shoulders and go, yeah, whatever. And but I think you must take some kind of credit for that, because like I said, that brand that's on your t-shirt right now wouldn't exist had you not developed it. And I'm intrigued as to how you developed it, why you developed it. What was this? Is there a background? Is there a story there behind the reason that you chose cancer? Because obviously there's a million charities out there that we could go down, and certain things. Is there something that is personal to you there that you thought, right, if there's a charity I'm going to go at, it's going to be this?
So weirdly, I don't have like a personal connection, and everyone always kind of presumes it, and everyone always says like, "Oh, you must have lost someone that meant something to you. You must have seen somebody go through something." You know, I have there was somebody who was not a biological grandfather, but almost classed as a grandfather, who was a very strong memory, as me, of being probably one of the only people from an early age who was someone who was very kind, very decent, and he died of cancer, and that was a memory, but I wouldn't say that attributes this incredible emotional attachment or reaction. But it was kind of a culmination of seeing a lot of people around me, either in work, seeing, you know, my ex when we were really young, she'd lost her uncle, and I'd seen the battle back and forth that he'd been through, as in like he'd got over it. He was a winchman in the Navy. He got over it. Everything was amazing. It came back and took him very, very quickly. And then my wife, seeing her grandfather pass away very, very quickly after her grandmother had just successfully gone through cancer treatment, just saw to me how much it affects people. And in terms of social issues, you know, cancer does affect 1 in 2, and it's going to be physically affecting 1 in 2 in the next 20 years. So it was something that I was like, okay, this is something that affects many people, and there's so many different aspects to it. There's people that go through it and survive, and the things that they deal with at that point. There's people that go through this and lose from a long battle. There's people that go through it and lose from a quick battle. And then there's financial implications, there's physical implications, there's mental implications. There's so much that stems from cancer. And also cancer hasn't got a cure on you know, on the horizon. It's a multiple cell growth. It can be completely random. So again, that was a big thing to me, that whether you were rich, poor, black, white, you know, Jewish, Christian, whatever, it still came for you. So again, it was a great equaler. And it started by doing lots of little individual things, and I just poured my heart out doing individual fundraisers that didn't raise a lot. And that's not to put anyone down that raises, you know, £200-300, because it's phenomenal to do that, but I was putting a lot of time and effort in to do something that wasn't having a big result. So for me, again, going back to that mindset of I want my effort to have an impact upon as many people as possible, it wasn't doing that. So what I changed to was trying to, okay, I need to involve other people. So pre it being called Battle Cancer, I came up with the idea of deadlifting the weight of the Titanic. So I was like, okay, I'm learning very quickly to get people's attention. It has to be visual. It has to be a little bit quirky. It has to get our local newspapers involved, all this kind of stuff. So I was like, right, Titanic sunk, needs lifting back up. You know,
did you call it Raise the Titanic?
We did. We call it Raise the Titanic. Yeah. So we called it Raise the Titanic. We had a logo.
I didn't actually know that.
Well, yeah, so that was our thing. I mean, the terrible website that I made is still in existence. So if you ever want to go and see it, and we got on like local Manchester TV, and then it was the content. You would come and you would pay £5, and you would do a couple of deadlifts to like contribute to an overall weight that would be deadlifted.
Yep.
Then at the same time, I was like, okay, cool, let's try and break like a Guinness World Record. Like that gets attention. People donate to people, breaking a Guinness World Record. So we got 12 of us that were all powerlifters, coordinated it. We had to have judges, multiple cameras. We had to do all manner of things. We deadlifted for 12 hours to make the most accumulated deadlift weight for 12 people. And then I was like, right, okay, this is all going on. This is cool. This is raising some money. How do I get this even more? How does it go wider? So we contacted it. At the time, it was Pure Gym. And I rang up as many Pure gyms as I could find. And I said, look, will you just, if I send you some stuff, like, can you just set up a bar and some plates and encourage, even if it's just your PTs or your coaches or whatever, to get involved? So I think we ended up having like 30 odd different Pure gyms get involved, and not from a corporate level. It was from literally local gym managers agreeing to put it on. Because my naivety was like, oh, I can just ring up Pure Gym and speak to the CEO, and he's just going to like roll it out. And I've learned that doesn't happen. But that was a naivety at the time, and it was amazing. We did. So the year before, I raised like £270. Then this year, through Raising the Titanic, we raised 38,000. So I was like, okay, this is the difference. You know, if I spend 4 months of my time doing all these things, you know, ringing up people, getting all this stuff involved, the output impact is significantly bigger. So that's what bore it. And I was like, okay, powerlifting is a very niche sport. You know, there's people that want to deadlift. Social media, in terms of people looking at powerlifters, looking at early onset fitness, even when we did Raising the Titanic, wasn't as big. And then I turned to functional fitness. And, you know, we got called a CrossFit event from the year one, and we're not, and we never have been. We've been phenomenally lucky that the CrossFit community have attached to us and are probably about 70% of the participants.
Yeah.
But the event was about functional fitness. It was about movements that if you went to a Zumba class or you went to a David Lloyd class or anything, that you would expect those movements in our workouts that we would challenge you through. And that's, I found Victoria Warehouse in Manchester. I rang them up, said, if I book you for a day, how much does it cost? They said this, and I was like, okay, I don't have that now, but I'll just book it, and hopefully I'll sell it and I'll get as many people to come and take part as I can. And worst case scenario, I don't, and I owe Victoria Warehouse however much money. And then just worked, and it became this concept of having workouts across a day, it being multiply accessible to as many people as possible.
And so what was the money raising aspect of this? So would I'd come along and I could do, you mentioned Zumba there. So I would pay to do that workout, or how would it work?
So it was a competition. So not that anyone cares that it's a competition, but it was a competition. So you would enter a team of 4. So we always had it was teams of 4 that you'd be able to come, and you'd get a fundraising pack that we'd send to you. So in that fundraising pack, it would tell you, okay, you're going to have this big challenge of all these workouts you're going to do in one day, back to back, in this massive venue, and it's going to be a competition. And here's some ways to get people to support your journey. We talked about trying to be that your entry fee was the donation.
Yeah.
Very quickly, you realize that to house 6,000 people and have equipment and insurance and security, that's not free. So we were like, okay, so that's not going to be possible. So what we did do is say, okay, how much does it cost to make one of these events? It costs exactly this. Okay, that's your ticket cost. Break that down. We need however many teams to come. And if each one of those teams fundraises £200 each, then we're going to raise a lot of money. So that was always the goal. Yep. So you would receive your first email. It would say, lovely, as a team of 4, we encourage you to fundraise £200. That's £50 each. And you can pick any cancer charity you want. Because a big bugbear for me was that cancer charities own their own fundraising vehicles. And so unless you want to support that particular charity, you're a bit up the creek. So you can't, you might want to support a local hospice that's close to you, that's helped you with a family member. Right. But you can't go and do a certain run or a certain activity if you want to support them. Where I was like, okay, let's support everyone. You can choose what you want to do. But we spoke to the main charity players, Click Sargent, Macmillan, Cancer Research, and we said, look, come, be here, just get donations off people, give us links so we can show people how to donate for you. And then we got donation managers that then spoke to the teams so that they would assist them with their own fundraising. Yep. And that became the concept. So the very first Manchester event, it equaled in one day what we'd done across for the whole of Raising the Titanic. We got like £40,000. So I was like, right, cool. This is a concept. I don't know anything about putting events on. I don't know anything about marketing. I don't know anything about all this stuff, but I'm going to learn it along the way, and I'll do my very best to kind of pick up on this and try and expand. And we then went from Manchester to doing a London one. Again, loads of lessons learned, but that year we raised like 180,000 across the 2 events. And then it became, okay, this is replicatable in other countries and other places. And it just became a passion to put as many of them on as possible and spend the countless hours trying to market them and then sell them and get people interested in them and understand the concept, because the concept as well is quite alien, especially in Europe. They don't really associate fundraising with going away, asking friends and family to kind of sponsor them. It's not really done. They just see donations as a direct donation. So they would give you money and that's it. You just give you money and it's done. Yeah. So again, we had to really learn the way that culturally they accept and look at different fundraising vehicles and then suit and move things around. But pre-COVID, we'd held them in Germany, in Spain, in America, in Ireland, across the UK, and then we did all manner of different things. We did activation tours. We'd book a week off holiday off work and drive around and drop into gyms and take over classes, so we could show people what kind of workouts you do at our event. And we'd also layer that with a lot of fun, but we'd open up by getting people to talk about people that they'd lost, and we'd also talk about checking yourself and talk about like maintaining your own health MOTs. So we were starting to evolve of, okay, fundraise for different charities, but we can do stuff ourselves as well now to impact people. And that was the path that we were on kind of pre-COVID, and that was how we'd managed to raise so much money. And we'd go to big events. I mean, honestly, the amount of emails I've sent to people that probably I had no right to email saying, I know you're the kind of guy who runs this gigantic event. can you let me have a free stand at your event? I was like, and I'm just going to turn up and I'm going to fundraise and I'm going to do a stupid pull-up challenge or a burpee challenge or whatever. And they'd let you in, stupidly enough. And, you know, that again, they would raise thousands, and it would really make us be able to approach a market that I didn't have before and get to talk to people about what we were doing. So yeah, it bore from this effort is not having an impact to, again, you know, yeah, and luck is made of who you're around and who you're with, and so many people have supported this. Like I say, like I've done all this, I haven't. There's, you know, a huge amount of volunteers and teams that have created this, but I always wanted to keep saying, let's do more, let's do more, let's do more. Even though people would say, do it small, do it in a gym, just do it here, just do it that. I was like, nah, we're gonna do it. Build it and they'll come. That was always my little
Field
thing.
of dreams, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. So you keep referring to we. So what's we? What kind of team are you have behind all of this? And are these volunteers? Are they people that you pay? Are they people that, you know, how does it all work? How do you know, the mechanisms behind
So
are you classed as a charity?
No, so it's as a company, but we're actually going under charity registration as we talk. So
right.
As we speak, which is something that
which is a big old rigmarole, right? It's a
very long process, and financially as well. Like there's an element to that. But also we now do an epic thing, which hopefully I'll speak about in a little bit. But so we're going through that process. But it was volunteers. So up until November, everybody was a volunteer. It was people that had been affected by cancer. It's people that we'd met along the way. It was friends, it was family. You know, my wife's aunts, cousins, mum, dad, they've all done stuff within what we're trying to do. And then it got to November, and you know, I started to dip my toe into seeing if we could get commercial partnerships. So seeing, can people who are brands, do they see some kind of worth in what we're doing here? Because I used to just give away like a stand. I'd be like, yeah, you want to stand, you sell some t-shirts, like cool, that means you'll bring people in. And that kind of shifted and that changed coming into this, you know, from November, which is what resulted in the decision to kind of take this leap and leave. You know, me and my wife, we said, okay, we can probably exist on around about 40% of what we used to earn. So we won't be taking a big wage. We can exist on that. And we've managed to cover some wages, not all, but some wages on those commercial partnerships. And then we took on two fantastic girls that left their jobs, again, like 50% pay cuts to come and work with us. And you know, it's been very difficult during COVID, but they left. So again, that started to come from the commercial partnerships. And just to put on 9 events in 7 different countries takes time. It's not something that I could continue to do and do well whilst working full time in the police. Yeah. So it became that. And then, then COVID happened. But prior to that, that was the path that we're on. And, you know, I'm trying constantly to convince brands, brand partners, media outlets, everyone else to kind of look and see what we're doing and back us, because the more we get backed, the more we do. And that's, you know, that's been the kind of growth that we've been really lucky to kind of have in this past year that's supported us with that.
That's amazing. So what's so plans for the future? So do you see yourself going back into the police? Maybe I shouldn't ask that. Your colleagues are probably watching. Don't say anything.
It's like, you know, it's almost like a different life away, and you know,
it's a long time. Well, it is a long time. It's a short time though as well, isn't it? 4 years.
I think, to be really honest with you, I don't see, but I mean, you know, it kind of depends what happens in the next year. I think what we're doing with the charity side and the amazing work that we're ready to sort of launch and announce to the world, like that is so passionate to me. And I mean, I train a lot. I train 2-3 hours a day, but I work 11 hours a day. Like, you know, both me and my wife, we start work at about 8 in the morning.
Yeah.
And we
so does your wife work for the charity as well? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's me and my wife that are the two kind of full time.
She quit her job and.
Yeah. So she left hers. Because she couldn't get a career break or anything with hers. So she just left hers. And you know, we work from 9 in the morning, about 8 in the morning to about 9 at night. Like we quite often, like when something happens, we'll be sat here till 10 o'clock, 11 at night. And we don't have a Saturday and a Sunday. Like we work Saturday and Sunday, but it's different because it doesn't feel like work. It never feels like I'm clocking in and clocking out. It's something that's such become my life now that I think, bar me losing my house and, you know, not being able to pay the bills, I think I don't really see myself going back into that career.
Cool. So you mentioned some kind of things in the pipeline? I know there was an air of secrecy and kind
Oh
of
no, I'm
things are
super
pending.
open to talk about them. Yeah,
So,
no,
so what's happening? So tell me about these events and tell me what the next stage is for Battle Cancer, and tell me what the next stage is for you, and where things are going. And again, the people listening to this, is there something they can do? Is there something they can help with? Can they contribute? Can they get involved? What's happening?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the events are dead easy. Like we don't know. In terms of the short term, we moved everything to June beyond. So
Yep.
our Irish event in Dublin is from June. It's outdoors, and then our first indoor event is from August, which is in Manchester. We have events in Sweden in July. That's outdoors. So everything that we've moved is from June. And I kind of hope, maybe I'm wrong, and there'll be plenty of experts that'll tell me otherwise. I kind of hope by June we're going to be in a different position in terms of certainly outdoor activations. And our events are not football events. We have maybe 5,000-6,000 people at our events. We don't have 30,000 people. So, I'm reasonably confident that we'll get back to them.
So the 5,000 or 6,000 people, you're talking about competitors there, people who are competing and doing
So
the events?
that's probably in total. So the biggest competitors we ever had was we had 2,000 in London. Wow. And then we tend to have about 3,000-4,000 people come and be there in the day. So we tend to have quite a few through come. And again, like that's really big, but like I still see one day that we can be filling football fields with like stadiums. I think we can, be taking over really big places and have 10,000 people do it. But at the minute, I'm so blessed that is how many people we had. But it's not the mass events, it's not Glastonbury, it's not other stuff. So I'm really confident we get them back. But the most exciting thing, and we announce it next week, but I mean, I've talked about it to everyone I know that by the
time this goes out, it'll be.
Oh yeah, be gone. Sorry. We were so fortunate to meet a guy called Simon Darby who runs something called Move Forward Northern Ireland, and he, over the past 3 to 4 years, 4 years now, he's used specifically CrossFit as a tool for people post-cancer treatment. And he worked with young people. So he works for Click Sergeant, and Click Sergeant is aimed at post-cancer for young people and how you get them back on track with their life. And he's done incredible work, academic studies with what he's done, just phenomenal success stories of people that have been through his program. And we met because we started giving them access to our events. We fundraised for his and for Click Sergeant, and it became this thing that's just constantly going on in my mind. And we chatted to Simon, and Simon said, look, I'm kind of budgetary ring fenced to Northern Ireland. He's like, we're lottery funded, we're part of Click Sergeant. There's so much red tape to what I do. Like, if you have this concept, what can you do with it? It's like, if I kind of give you my blessing to go and, use the concept of free fitness classes for people post-cancer, what can you do with it? So that lit a fire like nothing under my ass. And that became like the past 6 months of real work and kind of upskilling myself and working very hard now to launch the charity. So we're launching Battle Cancer Projects, which is the charity, and there's 2 arms to it. But the first main arm is that we will be providing, there's going to be 9 remote locations. So it's a 12-week program where if you're post-cancer treatment, you have to be clear of chemotherapy by at least 3 months. You have to have been signed off by your primary care doctor to say you're allowed to re-engage in fitness.
Yep.
You can come to one of our 9 remote locations and have 12 weeks of fitness classes for free. So you'll have 24 weeks of fitness classes from a coach for free. And that's a big thing for us. So those classes are not huge. They're 12 people. They're not, I can't do 50 at a time, but that's because of COVID and the way that we now have to space things out and equipment sharing, et cetera, et cetera. But we've got 4 in the US, 5 here in the UK. And the really cool thing is, I've funded all that off just £11,000 worth of money. So I've got 80 people that are going to have 24 sessions for just £11,000. So every single penny from what we've done has gone straight into that. And it's phenomenal. Like, we also have an online version. So the online version is going to be unlimited. You can have as many people join it as you want. I always hate using this as an example, but like, let's say yourself went through cancer, you came through the treatment, and you wanted to come onto the online program, you can share that with your coach, PT, gym owner. You can share it with a loved one. So you can actually give them buddy access so they can go through the program with you. And it'll take you through a 12-week program The program is different from Simon's. Simon is just a phenomenal human being, and he delivers his own individual, but we're now working with remote coaches. So we work with a guy called Colin Robertson, who is just, apart from the fact he's like looking at myself in a mirror of like 20 years, don't say 30, he'll back to me. He basically looks like me, but he's just got grey hair and a grey beard. But the difference with me is he is a professor, multiple doctorates. He's worked in elite sport. He's been to 2 World Cups, been to 3 Olympics as a head doctor. He's a fellow at Oxford and a fellow at American one, Harvard. And he's worked at multiple universities, and he specializes in not only elite sport, but also recovery post-cancer for elite sport. And he's worked across multiple different age ranges, everything else. So he's helped us to formulate our version of that 12-week program. So it's taking time-domained movements, basic bodyweight movements, very lightweight work to progress someone regardless of their age or cancer treatment, previous experience. It allows all that to be thrown into the mix. And what we do across that period is we test them. So we test them 3-week intervals of variant different things. And there's a couple of reasons why we do the test. So first of all, that pathway and journey back from recovery is often very difficult to grasp. So we want to give the people in the program clear data that they are getting better and that they are starting to return back to different elements of physical abilities. So we look at grip strength, we look at mobility, we look at resting heart rate, we look at like 200-meter dash, we look at 1K, we look at push press strength, and we look at what else do we do? There's loads of different little aspects. But
and how are you tracking all of that? Is that
so they basically have
or?
Well, so one conversation which I won't talk about, but we're trying to get someone from a tech point to get involved. But very basic stuff. So we use a Geiger meter for the mobility. We use a sit and reach test for the online version. We use a grip strength test. That's the one. I always say like dyno something. I think that's Dynarod, and they're what unclog.
It's if you drains blood.
And things that if you're a PT or you're a coach, like you'll have done this in your level 1 stuff. Like it's very basic stuff, because we want to just show them that on a basic level of being fit for life, not being an athlete, not being, if they want to return something fantastic, but our goal is about returning a quality of life, and it's to show that that's happening. So our goal is that somebody might not be able to pick up the kids because of the serious fatigue, that the muscle atrophy that's happened as a result of treatment of cancer. We want to get them back to that. Like, that's the goal. So it's not to turn them into bodybuilders and powerlifters and crossfitters. It's just to do that. And this is the most passionate thing, and it's unreal. Like the amount of people that I speak to that say there's a gap for this. So what we're trying to do in this, when we launch this, is to have these 9 locations, use this data set to help, first of all, mentally help recover these people that are post-cancer treatment, but also so that I have something behind me to say to people, I want to go to a big gym chain and say, look, this program, we review it every single time. We're live, we change it, we mold it on data, but this data is telling you that this is impactful. And by hosting, classes over 12 weeks, you can really make an impact. Because that 1 in 2 that I talked about earlier means that people post-cancer treatment are going to be growing. So 1 in 2 of us in 20 years will be physically affected. Cancer survival rate is going up, which is great. However, that means that there is a huge amount of the population that are post-cancer treatment, and we as the fitness industry are not quite in the position to deal with them en masse. And I think there's too much red tape, and there's too much in terms of people who are level 4 cancer. There's people, all manner of different things, that it costs money to get that, whereas as the big leaders in the industry, with a program that's self-learning, self-evolving, and really actually helping people, we can have a big dent. And my kind of goal with this is, I can't open 50 gyms that do it, but what I can do is fund 50 gyms to do it. I can fund 100 gyms to do it. I can fund PTs to offer that service one-on-one. Like, that's the goal of Battle Cancer Projects now, is to continue to fundraise through our events and give people the opportunity to fundraise something that means to them, but everything that I can do in my power I want to have that impact. So the impact now for me is not just financial. Like, you know, I'd said at the beginning, the decision from, you know, that thing to do raising the Titanic was, I can make a big financial impact. Now I think I can make an impact to help as many people, not just how much money can we raise. So that's the really cool thing. And I get so excited anytime I talk about it, and I probably use exactly the same words to everyone else, but that's what we're moving into. And I think that's going to be the most enjoyable thing over the next 2 or 3 years of growing this project.
It's amazing. So it's, you know, you're moving away from just that financial sort of assistance for these things, but you're also moving into the, you know, how can we contribute on a quality of life and well-being perspective, right? You know, because ultimately that's one of the big things with anybody going through any kind of major illness, is that when you get to the other side of it, you know, your body isn't quite what it was. You know, certainly with cancer, it's a, you know, it's a challenging treatment. It's a hugely taxing treatment on, you know, on you physically, depending on, you know, various types and things like this. And then you get to the end of it, and you know, you have to physically regain yourself, right, as well as mentally. And I think this is where fitness and movement particularly sort of comes in. And this is something we talk about an awful lot just in general population, about the importance of movement in people's day-to-day lives. And obviously this is something where you've had that direct impact in your life of movement, where, you know, Thai boxing and, you know, MMA, jiu-jitsu and all these different things have kind of helped you channel, you know, your mental well-being and your physical well-being, and obviously, you know, the safety of yourself, right? You know, you learn skills to deal with your situation. And by the sound of it, you know, Thai boxing was probably a good skill to have given your situation at the time, right? So it's, you know, it's different horses for different courses as such. So Scott, it's amazing to hear about it. Obviously, once we've done the podcast and everything's in the podcast notes, we'll make sure there's links to Battle Cancer and what people can do. Obviously, you know, this isn't going to go out for a couple of weeks. So, you know, events and things like this, what I'll do, I'll keep tabs with you and make sure that any current events are going to be put out with this podcast. So those of you listening who want to get involved with the Battle Cancer events and things like this, we'll make sure there's links and everything there for you. Scott, you know, where do people find more about you, more about your events, more about what's happening? Obviously, you're very active on social. Is it Scott Brits across all channels?
Yeah. So in terms of finding us, like battlecancer.com, really simple. www.battlecancer.com, super easy to find us. You've got everything in there, and it links through to Battle Cancer Projects. There is a battlecancerprojects.com as well, but that just talks specifically about the programs, where they're going to be, the online version. And also, if you are post-cancer treatment, even if it's years and you just think you want to start moving and you want to look at this program, you can sign up through there. It's completely free. It will take you every process of how to do that, and the remote locations as well, they all are listed on there. So if you wanted to join one, you can see that. You find us at battle.cancer on Instagram. Again, you can find us as Battle Cancer on Facebook. Basically type in Battle Cancer, and fingers crossed it should come up on nearly everywhere. We've worked really hard to make sure that Google gets us to the top of stuff, and you'll find everything about what we're trying to do there. As in, like, personally for myself, like we talked about at the beginning, it's just Scott Brits. I don't have a website or anything like that. I just kind of try my very best through social media to get someone's attention with a photograph and then tell them what I want them to listen to about what we're trying to do. And it, you know, we also are desperate for people to give us stories, to give us like what they're doing, and they don't even have to fundraise through us. Like, we just want to talk about everybody else's fundraising, everybody else's shared experiences, and become like a hub where if you've been affected by cancer and you want to be now using fitness in any shape or form, that we can be utilizing and kind of funneling through for that. So yeah, plenty of places to find us, but pretty much just type in Battle Cancer somewhere, and fingers crossed you might see this
come up,
or somebody else talking at the beginning of it, and it'll come up.
That's absolutely amazing, Scott. I could talk to you for hours. I'm sure there's so many different kind of rabbit holes as such we could go down and talk about. I think you've got an incredible story, and obviously we've just touched on elements of it. But all I can do is wish you the best of luck for the year ahead. Obviously we'll stay in touch, and I'm sure there's some stuff that we can do together and figure some bits out. But thank you for taking the time out your day to, you know, I figure that you're very, very busy. So thanks for taking your time out today to jump on the podcast. And I'm sure that the listeners have thoroughly enjoyed your company as well. And until next time, thank you so much. And we'll speak soon.
No, thank you so much. Before I go, I'm going to say, like, I just constantly talk about the content that you put out and the message that you put out and the things that you say. I think you're one of the industry's leaders in speaking the truth, and it's been massive honor for me to kind of get and see, because you'll see I'm the stalker on every post, like, and everything day, because it's just great. It's such to the point, and you really eloquently verbalize, I think, what a lot of people in the industry that are really in the industry kind of think and say. So yeah, it's been amazing for me to get to sit here and answer some questions. So thanks so much, honestly.
Hey, hugely appreciate it. Thank you, Scott. All right, we'll speak soon.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.